Montana Territory, June 1883. The church doors slammed open so hard they rattled on their hinges, and every head in the pews turned just in time to see the bride bolt down the aisle, her skirts flying behind her like a white flag of surrender. Francesca. Someone shouted her mother, maybe. But Francesca Oakley did not stop. She ran like the devil himself was behind her, like every step she took was one closer to breathing again. Outside, the sun was blinding, the air thick with dust. She could hear the preacher yelling, her father cursing, and the crowd erupting behind her. Her boots hit the dry earth hard, and she headed straight for the corral across the road. That was when she saw him leaning against the fence, arms crossed, hat low over his brow, watching it all unfold like it was a show he never paid for. "Help me," she gasped, breathless. "Please?" Kellan Knox looked at her a long beat. Then he stepped forward, lifted her by the waist like she weighed nothing, and set her in the saddle of his paint horse. "Ride?" he asked, already swinging up behind her. She nodded, gripping the horn. "Fast?" They were gone before the doors of the church stopped swinging. They rode west, fast and hard, until the town was a memory and the noise of it faded into wind. Kellan kept them off the main roads, cutting through cottonwoods and shallow creeks, not speaking until the sun dipped low and the horse began to lather. He pulled up finally, near a narrow bend of the Musselshell River, and helped her down gently. She staggered a little, legs rubbery, catching herself on his arm. He steadied her without a word. Francesca bent at the river's edge and splashed water on her face, her hands trembling. "You got a name?" Kellan asked, his voice even. "Francesca Oakley," she said, teeth chattering now that the adrenaline was wearing off. "You always run from churches in lace." She looked up sharply. "I was supposed to marry a man twice my age. He wants my family's land more than he wants a wife." Kellan nodded once. "That sounds about right." She stared at him. "You do not even know me. Why would you help me?" he shrugged. "You looked like you needed it." She watched him unsaddle his horse, his movements calm and precise. He moved like someone who had seen more trouble than he talked about. "Who are you?" she asked. "Kellan Knox, cowboy, ranch hand, and a man who does not like watching women get cornered." She sat on a flat rock, hugging her knees. "Thank you." He nodded again, then tossed her his coat. She wrapped it around her shoulders, breathing in the scent of leather and horses and something steady. They made camp by the river that night. Kellan roasted beans and fed her without asking questions. She ate slowly, watching the firelight dance across his face. Strong jaw, quiet eyes, a man who did not fill the silence unless it needed filling. "I was not going to go through with it," she said finally. "I just froze. I kept hearing my father's voice in my head saying I owed it to the family. That I had to do what was right." Kellan added another stick to the fire. "And what is right for you?" She shook her head. "I do not know. I think I just wanted someone to see me." "I see you," he said simply. She blinked, throat tight. By morning, she had borrowed his knife to cut the lace off her sleeves and tied her hair back with a strip of leather. She looked less like a runaway bride and more like a woman who meant to survive. They rode toward the crazy mountains, keeping low, and Kellan brought them to an old line shack tucked into a grove of aspens. It was not much, just a cot and a stove, but it was dry and far from anyone who might come looking. "Rest here a while," he said. "I will check the traps. Bring back supper." "You do not have to take care of me, I know." But he did it anyway. For 3 days they stayed there. Kellan hunted and chopped wood. Francesca cleaned the cabin, made stew, and started to smile. Sometimes they sat on the steps in the evening, watching the sun sink behind the mountains. She leaned against his shoulder once, and he did not move away. "I never had someone look out for me before," she said one night. "You do now," he replied. She looked up at him, eyes bright. "Why?" He met her gaze steady. "Because you matter." Her breath hitched. No one had ever said that to her before. Not really. On the 5th morning, Kellan returned from town with supplies and a grin set to his jaw. "They are looking for you," he said. "Put up a reward." Francesca's stomach dropped. "My father," he nodded. And the man you were supposed to marry, he is offering $1,000 for your return. She pressed her hand to her mouth, but I told them nothing, Kellan went on. And we will stay ahead of them. She reached for his hand. You could have turned me in. I would never. She stared at him, something warm blooming in her chest. You barely know me, I know enough. That evening she kissed him by the fire, soft at first, hesitant. But he kissed her back like he meant it, hands gentle at her waist. I never thought I would feel safe with anyone, she whispered. You are safe with me, he said, forehead against hers, and she believed him. They moved again farther west, following old cattle trails. Kellan knew the land like he was born from it, and Francesca learned fast. She rode better now, her hands steady on the reins, and she laughed more. Real laughs, not the polite ones she used to give at those awful dinner parties. One night, as they camped near the Yellowstone River, she rolled over in her blanket and looked at him. Do you ever think about staying somewhere? He looked at her across the fire. I do now, her heart thudded hard. I want that, she said softly. With you. He crossed to her, sat beside her blanket, and traced a finger along her jaw. You sure? I have never been more sure of anything. He kissed her again, and this time it was not soft. It was everything they had both been holding back. It was promise. It was beginning. And when she fell asleep, curled against his chest, Francesca Oakley knew one thing for certain: she was not running anymore. The first real rain found them in the low hills near Big Timber, where the sky could change its mind in an hour, and the wind ran wild between the cottonwoods. They'd taken shelter in an abandoned line shack, its roof half-sound and its walls full of old nail holes. Kellan dropped a saddle blanket over the worst of the leaks, while Francesca set a kettle on the stove's rusted belly, coaxing a flame from the kindling with patient hands. Neither of them spoke much that evening. The patter of rain on the roof filled the quiet, and the heat from the stove soaked into their bones. She sat on the floor with her knees drawn up, watching steam curl from the kettle's lip, her hair damp from the ride. Kellan sat cross-legged across from her, sharpening his knife with slow, deliberate strokes. His boots were caked in mud and his shirt stuck to his back, but he didn't complain. Francesca studied the ragged hem of her skirt. Do you believe people can make something new? Even if they've come from something broken, his whetstone paused mid-draw. I think that's the only kind of new that ever means anything. She didn't answer right away. The fire snapped. Rain spilled heavier for a breath, then lighter. I used to think I'd end up like my mother, she said. Tired, waiting for someone else to decide if I was worth listening to. Kellan set the knife aside. You're not her. No, she said softly, but I was on my way. He pulled his knees up and leaned his forearms on them. You didn't go through with it, that counts. Her eyes lifted to meet his. I don't think I ever would have gotten out without you. You looked ready to jump, he said. I just gave you the saddle. She smiled faintly, but it didn't reach all the corners. Men like the one I was set to marry, they don't give up easy. If he finds us, he won't, Kellan said, with a quiet certainty that settled in her like warmth. But if he does, he didn't look away. Then he'll learn you're not his to take. She watched him a long moment, then rose to pour hot water into 2 tin mugs. She passed him one and sat beside him, their shoulders brushing. He didn't move away. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. Inside, it was still. I used to think safety meant comfort, she said. A big house, clean dresses, servants. Now I think it's when someone stands between you and the worst of the world just because they want to. Kellan took a sip from his mug. Comfort's fine, but I'd rather have peace. She let her head rest against his arm. I think I'm learning what that feels like. They stayed that way until the fire burned low. By morning, the rain had passed, leaving the grass heavy with dew and the air sharp as flint. They rode south along the riverbank, keeping to the trees. Francesca's voice was quiet but steady when she asked, "What did you do before you came north?" Kellan's jaw ticked. Worked cattle in Wyoming, then drove a herd up to the Judith Basin. Figured I'd stay a while. Didn't. Why'd you leave? He hesitated. Boss's son didn't like the way I kept to myself. Picked a fight. I didn't back down. Her eyes searched his face. Did he hurt you? No, he said, But I hurt him more than I meant to, and I don't like staying where I'm not wanted. She reached over and touched his wrist just for a breath. You're wanted now. They didn't speak after that, but he rode a little closer. Later that day, they stopped at a trading post nestled near the edge of the Absaroka foothills, where Kellan traded a fox pelt and a jar of wild plum preserves for flour, coffee, and a patch kit for the saddlebag she'd torn on a branch. While he saw to the horse, Francesca wandered the shelves in the dim interior, her fingers brushing over tins and folded calico. The shopkeeper, a thin man with a crooked shoulder, eyed her dress but said nothing. She paused at a bolt of faded blue cotton, the exact shade of the river at dusk. I've got coin, she said, lifting her chin. The man nodded once, set the bolt on the counter. You sewing for yourself? She looked out the window where Kellan was checking the cinch. Yes, good man out there. She turned back slowly. Yes. He is. When they left, the fabric was tied behind her saddle. That night she stitched by lantern light, her needle flying through the cloth with practiced ease. She'd learned young, before she ever knew it'd be the only thing her mother praised her for. Kellan sat on the stoop, rolling a cigarette between his fingers but not lighting it, just listening to the frogs sing down by the creek. You plan on making a dress or a tent out of that? He asked without turning. Francesca laughed, the sound low and rich. Dress. Though I could wrap us both in it if you're cold. He leaned back against the doorframe. Wouldn't be the worst place I've slept. She set the needle down and joined him outside. Darkness stretched around them, thick and full of quiet things. She tugged the blanket tighter around her shoulders. I used to think I'd end up in a house with lace curtains and a table set for 12, she said. Now I just want a stove that holds heat and someone who doesn't lie. Kellan looked at her, real and direct. You'll have both if you stay. She didn't answer with words. She leaned in and kissed him, slow and sure, her hand finding his. And this time, when he kissed her back, there was no caution left. Only choice. They crossed into the Gallatin Valley with summer rising thick off the grasslands and the rivers running high from snowmelt. Francesca rode with her spine straight and her eyes forward. Her blue dress rolled tight behind her saddle, untouched cloth waiting for the right place to become something more. Kellan led them along the edge of the forest where the cottonwoods gave way to lodgepole, always listening, always watching the ridgelines. He'd grown quieter as they'd moved west, not from distance but from care, like he was carrying more than the weight of their packs. One afternoon, as they watered the horses at a small creek, she crouched beside him and dipped her hands into the current. Her fingers brushed his as she passed him a filled canteen, and he looked up slow. You're thinking something, she said, not a question. Ran into a man I used to ride with back near the post, he replied. Said there's a couple of hired trackers sniffing around Livingston, not law, just paid men. She tightened the cap on the canteen. They're still looking for me, but they don't know where to look yet. She stood, brushing her palms on her skirt. How far do you think we'd have to go before they stop? Kellan rose beside her, taller by a head, the brim of his hat shadowing his face. Farther than we need to. There's a homestead I worked on 2 years back, south of here. Widow passed, left it to her nephew, but he never came back for it. It's just sitting quiet. No one else claimed it, too far out. Soil's rough, roof needs fixing. She looked toward the distant rise of hills. Sounds perfect. They rode until dusk, the sky burning down to ember behind them. The land grew wilder, fences giving way to open grazing and the narrow paths of elk. When they reached the old place, the house stood crooked but sound, its porch sagging, a shutter hanging by a single hinge. A windmill turned slow in the breeze, its blades catching the last of the light. Francesca dismounted and stepped through the knee-high grass, one hand brushing the edge of the porch rail. This could be home. Kellan tied the horses and joined her. We'd have to work it. Soil's dry, but there's a spring out back. If we dug a trench, laid pipe, I can manage a shovel, she said. He looked at her then, something settling in his eyes. You don't have to prove anything. I'm not. I just want to build something that won't be taken from me. He reached past her and opened the door with a careful push. Dust curled into the air, but the inside held. The stove stood centered against the back wall, a table tilted near the window, and a cot with a wool blanket folded at its foot. Francesca stepped over the threshold and turned in a slow circle. "First thing we fix is the roof," she said. "Then the shutter." Kellan leaned in the doorway, watching her claim the space with quiet surety. "You're serious about staying?" She met his eyes. "Are you?" "I've been waiting for a reason." She crossed to him, took his calloused hand in hers. "Then let's stop running." That night they slept inside, her head tucked beneath his chin, the wind rattling softly through the loose boards. Neither spoke of what might come. They didn't need to. By morning, Francesca had a list in her head: seeds to plant, boards to cut, a table to write. She pulled her hair back with twine and measured the broken shutter with Kellan's carpenter's rule while he fetched nails from the barn. When he returned, he found her on the porch with a hammer in hand, brows drawn in focus. "You planning to replace me?" he asked. She looked up, grinning. "Not yet, but I'll need something to keep busy while you're off chasing fence wire." He stepped beside her, set the nail between two fingers. "Then let's start here." Days passed in the rhythm of work, mending, hauling, sawing. The land gave slowly, but it gave. They cleared the overgrowth behind the house, unearthed a stone-lined path, and dug out the spring. Francesca stitched new curtains from the blue cotton, small white flowers blooming across the panes. Late one evening, as they stood side by side in the field they'd cleared, the scent of turned earth rising around them, she said, "I never thought I'd live like this." "Not once." Kellan leaned on the handle of his spade. "You regret it," she shook her head. "It's the first thing that's ever felt like it's mine." He reached for her fingers, still smudged with dirt. "It's ours." She turned to him, the last light catching in her eyes. "Then let's keep it that way." And when he kissed her in the middle of their field, the rows still crooked, the fence line half finished, the world felt steady beneath her feet. The first frost came early that year, curling white along the fence rails and leaving the garden soil too stiff to turn. Francesca ran her fingers along the window glass one morning and saw her breath cloud up in the kitchen's cold. The stove was burning slow, and Kellan was already outside, splitting wood with steady rhythm, his coat dusted with frost. She wrapped an old quilt around her shoulders and stepped onto the porch. The field lay gold and brittle beneath the early sun. The rows they'd planted had long since yielded potatoes, squash, beans, and now the earth rested, same as they did. "You didn't wake me," she said, voice low in the cold. Kellan leaned on the axe handle, chest rising with the effort. "You looked warm for once." She walked down the steps, boots crunching through frozen grass. "We'll need more than that stack if this weather holds." He nodded. "I'll ride to the mill outside Bozeman tomorrow. They've got seasoned pine. I can bring back a wagon load." She picked up a fallen log from the pile and carried it to the side of the shed without comment. When she came back for another, he stopped her with a hand on her arm. "You planning to haul the whole cord by yourself?" "I'm planning not to freeze." His eyes held hers. "You've been quiet the last few days." She looked toward the mountains. "I keep wondering how long we have before someone decides we don't belong here." "No one's come," he said. Yet, he didn't argue that. Instead, he set down the axe, pulled off his gloves, and reached into the inner pocket of his coat. He handed her a folded paper, creased and worn. Francesca opened it slowly. It was a deed, signed and stamped, dated 2 years back. The name scrawled at the bottom wasn't his, it was the widow's nephew, the one who'd never returned. But written in pencil across the bottom margin, in a hand not quite steady, was a line. "To Kellan Knox, for all work rendered and debts forgiven." She looked up. "You never said." "I didn't think it mattered until it did, so this land." "It's ours, Francesca. No one's taking it." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of wood smoke, and she folded the paper back into his hand. "Then we build like we mean to stay." That night, she lit every lantern they had and brought out the last of the dried apples. Kellan came in with a scuffed cheek and a rip in his sleeve, the result of a stubborn fence post. They ate beside the stove, the table between them warm from the lamp's glow. She poured coffee into mismatched tin cups and watched him roll his shoulders. "You ever think about what comes next?" she asked. He looked up from his cup. "Next season? No, I mean years from now." 10, 20. He ran a thumb along the rim of his cup. "Never used to, didn't see the sense in it. And now I think about planting trees, the kind that take years to bear." She smiled then, soft and full. "I was thinking of writing my sister. Just to let someone know I'm not dead. Will she understand? She might. She never liked Walter much either." He leaned back in his chair. "You don't owe them your whereabouts, I know, but maybe it's not about owing. Maybe it's about choosing what to carry forward." The wind moved around the house in long, low sighs. The fire crackled. He reached across the table, took her hand, and held it in both of his. "Whatever you write," he said, "I'll ride it to town myself." She nodded, a quiet weight lifting from behind her ribs. "We're not hiding anymore." "No," he said. "We're just living." Later, as she stitched a patch into the sleeve of his shirt, she glanced at him where he sat by the fire, carving a loop for the bridle strap. "Kellan," he looked up. "When spring comes, I want to build another room, one with real windows." He nodded once. "We will. And maybe," she said, eyes on her thread, "someday that room could hold a cradle." He didn't speak, but he set the carving down, crossed the space between them, and knelt beside her chair. His hand came to rest over hers, stilling the needle. "I'd want that," he said. She leaned forward, pressing her forehead to his. "So would I." Outside, the wind eased. The night settled deeper, wrapping around the house like a promise. Inside, nothing chased them anymore, and for the first time, Francesca let herself believe they were truly free. March came with a thaw that softened the ground and filled the creek until it spilled its banks into the low pasture. Francesca stood in the doorway, shawl drawn close, watching Kellan dig a shallow trench from the barn's edge to redirect the water. The horses paced inside, uneasy with the rising wet. She stepped down into the mud and joined him, boots sinking halfway to the ankle. "I can take the other end," she said. He paused, leaned on the shovel handle, and wiped his brow with the back of his wrist. "You'll ruin your good shoes." "They've been ruined since December," she replied, squatting beside the trench and starting with her hands. "Besides, it's spring. Everything gets messy before it grows." The water pulled toward the new cut slowly, and by afternoon the worst of the pooling had eased. Kellan stepped back and studied the path of it, then looked at her, hair damp and streaked with mud. "Still want to add that room?" he asked. She pushed a strand from her face. "Especially now, we'll need space." His eyes narrowed slightly, reading her. "Space for what?" Her smile was quiet, but it reached all the way through. "A cradle won't fit in the kitchen." He didn't speak right away, just stared, then let out a breath that shook a little and stepped toward her. "When?" he asked. "I'm not sure, but I've felt it for weeks." "It's early still." He touched her face, thumb grazing her cheekbone, and something in him broke wide open. "You sure?" "I know my body," she said, "and I know what this is." He kissed her then, not in haste, but with everything he'd never said aloud. They spent the next day clearing the spot beside the house where the new room would go. Kellan measured the ground twice, then again, muttering about slope and drainage. Francesca laid the plans in her head where the window would face, how high the shelf should be, how many coats of whitewash it would take to catch the light. By mid-April, the timber had been hauled from the mill and stacked in neat rows beside the barn. Kellan worked from sunup with a steady hand, and Francesca joined him when she could, though he watched her carefully now, always ready to lift what she shouldn't carry. One evening, she paused as he nailed the first of the roof beams into place. "You ever think about the kind of father you'll be?" she asked. He looked down at her from the ladder. "I used to think I wouldn't be one at all." She tilted her head. "Why not? Didn't come from much, didn't have an example I'd want to follow." She nodded. "Neither did I." He set the hammer down and climbed down, wiping his hands on his trousers. "But I know what I wished for, someone who showed up every morning, who listened. Who didn't leave. You do all those things already." He looked at her, then like the weight of it was settling in for the first time, and he stepped forward, resting his hand against her belly just above the apron's edge. "I won't let you raise this child alone. Not even for a day. I never thought you would." They finished the room by the end of May. It smelled of raw wood and new beginnings, and Francesca spent her mornings stitching muslin and laying polished river rocks along the windowsill. She pressed fresh lavender between the folded linens and left the window cracked so the scent of the grass could find its way in. Kellan carved a cradle from leftover pine, each corner smoothed and rounded by hand. When he finished it, he didn't say a word, just brought it inside and set it beneath the window, then took her hand and stood beside it as the light moved across the floor. The child came early one September morning. The birthing was hard and long, the kind that leaves a woman hollowed out and made new in the same breath. Kellan never left her side, not when she cried out, not when she bled, not when her grip left bruises on his forearm. When the wail finally came, sharp and high and alive, he bowed his head and let the tears fall. "It's a girl," the midwife said. "Strong lungs." Francesca reached for the child, cradling the slick weight of her, heart wide open. "She's perfect," she whispered. Kellan sat beside her, one arm around them both. "She's ours." They named her Eliza, after no one in particular, just a name that felt like sunlight on skin. She took to Kellan's arms like she'd always known him, and Francesca watched the way he held her, like she was made of something he'd never known he was allowed to love. As the leaves turned and the nights lengthened, their life folded into rhythm. Francesca rose early, Eliza swaddled against her chest, and Kellan brought in wood before the frost set in. The stove stayed warm, the porch stayed swept, and the cradle rocked in time with the wind. One evening in late October, Francesca stood at the edge of their field, Eliza bundled in her arms. The sky burned low behind the trees, and birds moved in wide arcs above the hills. Kellan stepped up beside her, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "I used to think I was meant to drift," he said. "But I look at this, at you, at her, and I can't imagine ever wanting to be anywhere else." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "We built this, with our own hands, with what we had, and we'll keep building." The wind shifted. Eliza stirred, then settled again. Francesca looked up at him. "You ever think we deserved all this?" He didn't answer right away, just traced her jaw with the back of his hand. "We earned it," he said. "Every hard mile. Every buried part of ourselves we had to dig up and set right." And under the wide Montana sky, with the land quiet around them and their daughter sleeping in her arms, Francesca Oakley Knox believed him. They had carved love from the roughest ground and made it into something that could stand against winter, against memory, against anything the world might still try to bring. They didn't need more than that. They had each other. They had home. And that was enough for the rest of their days.